flip it around to the front like this. And so I'm going to interface the piece on this side of the band. So this is my right side. I went ahead and put a little pin in my right side because this is easy to confuse because it looks the same. And so I opened it up and I went ahead and cut a piece of interfacing, and the interfacing is a crisp sew-in. Okay, on dress shirts, typically they don't use fusible because they get laundered and worn a lot, and sometimes, and they usually get sent to the cleaners, and a lot of times your fusibles can start to come out. So this is a sew-in, and I cut out my sew-in to be the exact amount that I need, the width. So I went from the middle over to this edge minus my 5/8 and cut out my strip of interfacing at 1.5 inches wide, and then I measured how long I needed, and I cut that. And I cut it with rotary cutters. You can rip off your interfacing to get it on grain, but then you get kind of a fuzzy edge, and it's hard to find a nice, crisp, clean edge. So once I did that, I went ahead and did rotary cutters to get it nice and smooth. Now I'm going to hand tailor baste this on, and this is, I put it on there, pin it on, and this is tailor basting. So this is what you're going to do. So what I do is I simply go down the middle of the band, middle of the interfacing. I go down about an inch, inch and a quarter, and then I take about a 1/2 inch bite with my needle, and and it creates diagonal lines on one side, and it creates just little kind of bars on the other. And I'm doing it in a white color. I don't want to put a lot of dark colors on this shirt because it's a light colored shirt, and I don't want any of the color from the thread coming off. Now, it happens once in a while with colors that are a little bit harder to dye. Dark yellows, black, red, those are a little bit harder to dye. Now, I only need single thread, and I'm going to run out of thread here, but I'm just going to go ahead and do as much as I can, and then I'm going to start to sew it up because I want to keep moving to show you what we're doing. All right, but you can see how this goes very quickly, and you just simply put it in. And the reason why I'm not sewing it in is because I can keep it here on the fold. The reason I'm not sewing it in is because it's not into any seam allowance. However, when I finish this, after I get it sewn on, I will come back and edge stitch or top stitch, and then I put buttons. Well, on this side it'll be buttonholes. Okay, so I have just a little bit left here, but I'm just going to leave it for now because I want to show you what the next step is. Okay, so now I'm going to take my front, and here's my band, and I'm going, remember I sew it to the back and swing it around to the front. So now I'm going to go ahead and pin this and sew this. Now, when I pin this, if you can see this, I've got edges that have different sizes on them, and so they don't really match up good at the seam allowance. At the seam edge, but at the seam allowance they match up perfectly. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to match it up at the seam allowance, and see, then when this gets folded over, then it matches up perfectly with that shape. But when you look at it, you think, oh, it doesn't match because the seam allowance is taller than this one. But don't look at that. Look at the seam. And this matches up perfectly at the seam. And I'm matching it up also at my little stripes that I have here. Okay, so I'm just making sure everything matches up good. And then I'm going to sew this at 5/8. I'll do a 5/8 seam here. Okay. All right. That's good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, okay, I have just sewn my band on to the front, and if you'll notice, this is my right side, and I have actually sewn the right side of the band to the wrong side of the shirt. And so this is one of those rare times when we sew right side to wrong side. That's our iron getting warm. Okay. And I am now going to...
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Now we can go.
All right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to press this seam open. Okay? So just, again, I sewed the right side of the band, wrong side of the shirt, because I'm going to flip it over to the top. So even though this is an enclosed seam, we always press them open first. And we do that to embed the stitches. And our iron is very noisy this morning. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is now I'm going to press it again. Now that I've got those stitches all flattened out and embedded in there, now I go back over it again and I'm going to press the seam towards the band because it will be enclosed within the band. Okay, all right, and then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press my seam allowance in along my interfacing here. Okay, and you want to keep this at 5/8 right here, but because I've cut this on a stripe, get a little steam going, because I've cut that on the stripe, I can actually press it down right along that stripe, because this was a woven in plaid. So I know that those stripes are on grain. Okay. All right, so now I have that done. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually fold this over so it just covers that stitching. And I'm going to line this up. And then I'm ready to I can either edge stitch or top stitch. Now, before I do that though, I'm going to trim and grade. So I'm going to trim this side. On the trimming and grading, the one that's widest to the world is this one right here. So I'm going to trim that to 3/8, and I'm going to trim this to 1/4. All right? And it's a little easier to trim them both at 3/8 and then go back and trim this one just a little bit less. So I can do it that way. But then I've also got this 5/8. When this comes over like that and it barely covers, then I have an option of either edge stitching here or top stitching. Now if I top stitch, it's usually about 1/4 of an inch in. So if I do that, I want to trim this to 3/8. If I edge stitch like 1/8 of an inch in, then I could trim this to 1/4. So I just have to decide which one I want to do. And I haven't decided yet. So I'm going to go ahead and trim and grade this and trim this, and then I'm going to bring this over and pin it, and I'll show you, we'll take it up from there. Okay, so I've gone ahead and trimmed and graded, and I did 3/8 on this edge, and then underneath here I've got 1/4. Okay, and then on this side I went ahead and left 1/4 of an inch because I'm going to edge stitch. All right, so now that I've got that, I'm now ready to fold my band and flip it to the right side. And I'm going to line up my little plaid that I have here. And so in order to get this right where I want it, I'm just going to pin it all the way down. And then I will be ready to go ahead and edge stitch. So let me go ahead and get this all pinned. And I'm going to pin this every few inches because I want to make sure that my plaids match up good. So, all right. So when I get this all pinned, we'll come back and go to the sewing machine.